Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 12th annual Greeting the Statehouse. My name is Jesse Carbonda. I have the great privilege of being the executive director of the Hoosier Environmental Council. And we are just so thrilled that you are here. I want to begin with two words. One is gratitude. Tremendous gratitude to all of you for giving your day to be with us. A special appreciation to our to those who have traveled from afar to be with us. Just one logistical thing there. I want to also express gratitude to the HEC team. The tremendous turnout you see, just the beautiful venue and layout would not be possible without our wonderful HEC team, our lead coordinator, Amanda Shepard, and all of our staff. And I want to give a shout out, in addition to the tremendous work that Amanda's done coordinating all the logistics and outreach. I also want to give a shout out to Bob and Jenny and Michelle and to Carl and to Shannon, those who you will not see on stage. All the others that I have not mentioned, you will see on stage, and I honor and respect and appreciate all of them for all that they've done. I would love to thank each and every sponsor of Greeting the Statehouse this year, but I want to give a special shout out for the moment to our Sky is the Limit sponsors, who are Applied Ideals, Innovative Solar, Greenscape Geeks, Skylar Creative, Whole Sun Design, Griffey's Creek Studio, and Cummins. They are all, in their different ways, really at the helm of environmental sustainability in the business community in Indiana. The second word that I want to use in addition to gratitude is celebration. And one element of celebration is the fact that this year we have 25 nonprofit organizations that are sponsoring Greening the Statehouse, which I think is a record. That's, yes, worth an applause. 23 green businesses that are supporting the GTS, which is, again, a remarkable thing. And another number to celebrate is all of you, 500 people here on this cold day. There are things that we want to celebrate as ongoing aspects of Greening the Statehouse as we celebrate our 12th year of doing that. And those include that we want to make sure that you have valuable information, that you're learning great advocacy techniques, that you're reconnecting with old friends, and that you're meeting new ones. If those four things are accomplished, then we have fulfilled what we want to do with you all today. The second thing is to talk about new aspects of Greening the Statehouse, which is that we are allowing more time for Q&A than we have in the past, and you can find biographies at hecweb.org/GTS. We have made a very intentional effort to bring new voices to HEC, so while you have often heard from our policy directors as speakers, now you will hear from new voices. We wanted to make more time for networking, which is something that you requested of us in our surveys, and both our breakfast and our lunch is entirely vegan. So please fill out the survey so that we can continue to keep improving as we carry on what we do. I want to talk quickly about 3 states of being at GTS 2019. One is we want you to be comfortable. The restrooms are in the back, right there, both men and women. Water is over here, so stay hydrated. Please flag our great volunteers like Lynette over here. So if you need anything, and then our hospitality table is basically our registration table if you have any needs that we can help you with. The second thing that we hope will be a state of being is to be green. And we have recycling and composting, which you see in the back right there. That's important. And to be engaged, please turn off your ringer, even if you are very proud of your ringtone. Also, the login information for Wi-Fi is both on your program handout and on the table tent cards on your tables. Please use our hashtags. One thing that we want to communicate is that we are a movement. Nothing could be a better illustration that we are a movement than the massive turnout that we're seeing together. And so please use those hashtags so that elected officials and others can know what a force we are together. Finally, you will have index cards on each of your tables. Please fill those out, raise your hand, flag a volunteer so that you send those up to us and that we can try to bring up your question to any number of our speakers. And now on to the program. So I wanted to start with a slide of an image of one of the more than 50 workshops and presentations that the Hoosier Environmental Council did in 2019. And what we learned from those workshops was that there were a great diversity of concerns on the part of Hoosiers, several of which are listed here. But the overarching concern that we heard in all those 50 presentations and workshops that we did in Indiana is that the dominant concern is climate change. Extreme weather is inescapable and vast across the globe. Here we're looking at the horrific brush fires in northeastern Australia. This is an image from South Sudan, which in its first few days has already displaced about 1 million people. This is a before and after image from Hurricane Dorian, which is continuing to devastate the Bahamas. And this is an example of deglaciation in South Asia, in the Himalayan mountains, which is a source of drinking water for more than 100 million of our fellow human beings. Now, the illustration, the demonstration of extreme weather is not a far-flung phenomenon. It is here. This is an image from the Midwest, and this was an image just from this year, just a few months ago, in which the flooding was so devastating that it knocked out a wastewater treatment plant, a drinking water plant, and other critical infrastructure that represents the basics of modern life. And so one can obviously be very weighed down by the reality of climate change. But today is about hope, and today is about solutions. We believe that every one of you is a superhero. We believe that every one of you has great talents to bring to the climate movement, whatever your profession, whatever your background. Here's an illustration. This is a living wall in London, and this represents a collaboration between ecologists and building engineers and architects. This helps to purify air, create a new aesthetic, and sequester carbon. If you're someone who loves finance, you could be totally geeked out by property assessed clean energy bonds, which is a brilliant innovation that's been around for just 10 years. And in its first 10 years in the United States, and you'll hear about it from a speaker of ours in a little bit, more than 240,000 projects have been implemented related to energy efficiency and solar energy. And then, probably the coolest image of all, this is a collaboration between artists and chemical engineers, and the idea is to create essentially ivy along walls that is solar powered. And just imagine the massive amounts of solar energy we could create through this type of design. These three images that I've shown you are illustrations of the power of entrepreneurs and inventors. And peer leaders, which all of us can be if we go solar or use transit or bike, we're all acting as agents of change as individuals. But fundamentally, if we are to confront something as grave as climate change, which eclipses the gravity of something like World War II, then we need collective action. Now, there was once a time when climate action was a bipartisan endeavor. believe it or not, this is not a fake image. This is an image of Speaker of the House Pelosi with former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, two people who have 180-degree different worldviews. And yet, there was a time when they were willing to go on TV and tout a commitment to strong bipartisan climate legislation. Today, the issue has become, unfortunately, partisan. Now, the silver lining is that every one of the leading candidates of one of the major political parties in America has unfolded climate action plans. That is the good news, that it has risen to the level that every candidate in one political party has felt compelled to release a plan. That is not true on the other side. However, this is where the 2019 Greening the Statehouse keynote speaker comes into play, and that is Congressman Bob Inglis. Now, it was Congressman Inglis's sincere intention to be here. He will not be here, unfortunately, because of the logistics of traveling across the country, visiting more than 50 cities in 2019 alone. But thankfully, he's going to be with us by video conference, and we have tested this out. He is going to be actually speaking to us from Spokane, Washington today. A little bit of background on our keynote speaker. He often is fond of saying that he is from the most conservative district in the most conservative state in America, a district in South Carolina. Former Congressman Inglis represented that district for more than a decade. For much of his life, he was a deep climate skeptic. Then he took a formative trip to Antarctica and a formative trip to see the Great Barrier Reef, and it brought about, coupled with pressure from his kids, a transformation in his thinking. And he went from being a deep climate skeptic to being someone who truly embraced the science of climate change. And not just embrace the science of climate change, but was willing to go to the mat to try to address it. And so when he was in Congress, he unveiled a very bold climate plan. Unfortunately, he paid a political price for that, and he would end up losing his seat in Congress. But though he lost his seat in Congress, he gained a life mission, and that is to advance climate action. And because of that courage to put principles over politics, Congressman Inglis was awarded the incredibly prestigious John F. Kennedy Profiles in Courage Award.
Well, thank you for letting me come by video. I wish I had been there in person, but such are the perils of travel. Anyhow, so it's great to see all of you. I can see you. I doubt you can see me because I'm on that teeny screen up front. But I'm excited about talking to you about free enterprise solutions to climate change, and either affirming you if you happen to be somebody that's in our target audience, or helping you if you're maybe outside of our target audience to get ready to talk at Thanksgiving dinner. You know, people are coming for Thanksgiving, and maybe my prepping you for that will make Thanksgiving go better. Particularly, perhaps we can make some progress on climate change. You've probably seen some of the videos of how Thanksgiving dinners sometimes don't go well, but I'll be trying to figure out how to talk to my oldest brother. You may be trying to figure out how to talk to Uncle Charlie, who's coming. So first of all, I should give you a little bit of additional background on how I come to this, because you're probably wondering how it is that republicen.org came to exist. So it's like this. For my first 6 years in Congress, I said that climate change was nonsense. I didn't know anything about it except that Al Gore was for it. In as much as I represented, well, let me see, I'm talking to Indiana. Yes, I can go ahead and say it. The reddest district in the reddest state of the nation. You know, I was just yesterday in Idaho, and I didn't make that boast. I said it was one of the reddest districts in one of the reddest states, but I think we can outdo Indiana on our redness in South Carolina. So I fit the district for the first 6 years, and that's the way it was. So I admit it's pretty ignorant to to base that decision solely on who was for it, who was against it. But that's the way it was for 6 years. Then I was out of Congress for 6 years doing commercial real estate law again in Greenville, South Carolina, and had the opportunity to run for Congress yet again in 2004. My son came to me. He's the eldest of our 5 kids. He's voting for the first time because he just turned 18. And he said to me, "Dad, I'll vote for you, but you're going to clean up your act on the environment." His 4 sisters agreed. His mother agreed. A new constituency was born. You know, these people can change the locks on the doors. That important constituency started me moving. And by the way, my son was going to vote for me no matter what. I mean, it wasn't in his economic interest to vote against me. I mean, it's possible, you know, to lose by 1 vote. And so he knew that we were mortgaging the farmette that we live on. Literally, you know what a farmette is, right? A farmette is when you're not making a living farming, you're just pretending to be a farmer. So, you know, we have 3 horses and 12 chickens and a great big garden, and we pretend to be farmers. So Robert knew we were mortgaging the farmette. He's going to vote for no matter what. What he's really saying was, "Dad, I love you, and you can be better than you were before. So how about make this Inglis 2.0, the new and improved version?" So that was step 1 of this 3-step metamorphosis. Step 2 was going to Antarctica with the science committee and seeing the evidence in the ice core drillings. We can go into that if you want to in the Q&A. Step 3 was another science committee trip and something of a spiritual awakening, which seems implausible on a godless science committee trip because, as you know, all scientists are godless. Well, apparently not, because this Australian climate scientist was showing us coral bleaching, and I could tell that he and I shared a worldview because I could see that he was worshiping God and what he was showing me at the reef. We'd go down, he has much better lung capacity than I do. I'd go back to the surface and be gasping for air, but he'd be all excited to tell me about what he'd just shown me down below. And I could see that he was worshiping God and that he wasn't worshiping the creation, but the creator behind the creation. And so, you know, St. Francis of Assisi said, "Preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words." So Scott was preaching the gospel. He's now become a very dear friend. And later, we had a chance to talk. And he told me about conservation changes he was making in his life in order to love God and love people. Scott does some things that some of my conservative friends might find odd. He rides his bike to work. He does without air conditioning as much as possible in Townsville, Australia, as long as his wife and 3 daughters will let him get away with. He hangs the clothes out on the line to consciously love people coming after us and to avoid having emissions. And so I got right inspired. I want to be like Scott, loving God and loving people. So I came home and introduced the Raise Wages, Cut Carbon Act of 2009. Note to self, do not introduce carbon tax in midst of Great Recession in reddest district of reddest state of nation. It will not go well for you. And it did not go well at all. After 12 years in Congress, I got 29% of the vote in a Republican runoff, and the other guy got the other 71%. So that is what you call a rather spectacular faceplant in politics. So at that point, a foundation came to me and said, "You know, Inglis, you're an unusual zoo animal. You know, a 93 American Conservative Union rating, 100% Christian Coalition, 100% National Right to Life, A with the NRA, 0 with the Americans for Democratic Action, a liberal group. 23 by some mistake with the AFL-CIO. I was really gunning for a 0 in South Carolina. Um, and so they said, actual conservative, will you speak and write for the proposition? That's what I've been doing ever since. So this is my full-time endeavor. There's 6 of us at republicen.org, and 2 in DC, 1 in Wisconsin, 1 in California. 2 of us live and work from South Carolina. So we're out to convince conservatives to enter the competition of ideas when it comes to climate change. And so, as you see there on the screen, we describe ourselves as energy optimist and climate realist. And we think it's an important thing to project this very different language, to speak in a different language. It's our native language as conservatives. And it's the way that conservatives have been a little bit off put by the conversation thus far. You know, if climate action is about doing with less and walking and eating bugs and repenting of our developed world and attacking the capitalistic system, well, none of that's attractive to conservatives. By the way, some of those things are clearly overstatements. But if it's about energy optimism, and if it's about innovation, and if it's about the free enterprise system and its ability to deliver that innovation more rapidly than government regulations or mandates or fickle tax incentives could ever imagine, then there's a way to get conservatives in on this. And if Tim or Jesse could advance to the next slide, I'll show you what we go around saying to conservatives. Basically, help them to see that there's a tribe for them, a place for them if they want to get involved in the climate conversation. Because, you know, we as human beings need the protection of the tribe. We need to live in community, even if we sort of don't like that sometimes. It's our reality as human beings. And so if you're the lone wolf, you feel cut off. You feel like you can't go home for Thanksgiving, perhaps, if you're a conservative who's concerned about climate change. But we try to help them see that there's a whole tribe out here of conservatives who care about climate change. And then if you advance to the next slide, see some of the words that come up in a word cloud when you're talking to conservatives about climate action. As you see, the big words that appear is this concept of stewardship and then accountability. These are prudence. These are words that conservatives, that resonate with conservatives. There'd be a different word cloud if you ask progressives why they were concerned about climate change. So you can see how the words we use are therefore different and calibrated to the conservative audience. On the next slide, you can see that we're making some progress. And this is really pretty exciting. You see that first bar that shows that most Americans very much are in favor or believe the country needs to act. It's the second couple of bars that matter to us most at republicen.org. You know, most polling data is presented as nationwide data. It's really sort of irrelevant to us because the second set that we're after, that's the audience that we key to. But the good news you see right there is that now 55% of Republicans say it's time for the country to act. Now, there might be some Republican politicians in the room. Let me just point out that I'm aware that we've got a lot of work to do yet, because 55 is not an overwhelming percentage. It's also true that among activists, if you could take that poll and turn it into a question of just asking activists within the Republican Party, it would be lower than 55. And so we've got work to do in those quarters, because those are the people that politicians are concerned about. You know, here's here's a reality that maybe only a politician can tell you, or a recovering politician can tell you, um, and let you in on the secret. Um, Politicians are afraid of the people they represent, but they are terrified of the activists in their own party, because those are the people who take you out. And so, uh, if you're a conservative, what's the safest thing to do is to slam yourself up on the right hand wall and make sure there is no daylight between you and that wall. Because if there's daylight between you and the wall, that's where a primary opponent sprouts. And the same is true on the left hand wall, by the way. You need to, if you're a Democratic politician, you need to slam yourself up on the left hand wall and make sure that there's no daylight between you and the wall. Because if there is, a primary opponent will sprout over there. So, for example, Jerry Nadler, who's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the U.S. House, is a friend that I had in Congress. And he told me one day, it's exhausting to represent the district that I represent. He said, he told me, I represent part of Manhattan, most liberal district in the country. He says, I've got to wake up every morning figuring out how to out-liberal my district. He said, it's exhausting. And so that's true on the left. It's also true on the right. And so what we live to do at republican.org is fill in that space to the right, to make it so that Republican politicians can move off of that wall and move towards Solutionville. And hopefully the same thing is happening on the left. So we're trying to fill that space between the right-hand wall and where Solutionville starts. So on the next slide, you can see some of the approach that we take and some of the words and the concepts. It's essentially, all that slide can be summarized in this, and my entire presentation can be summarized in this. We need to internalize the negative externalities associated with the burning of fossil fuels. Now, that made me sound like an economist, didn't it? But I'm not an economist. I once said that, by the way, to a reporter with the Greenville News, the largest newspaper in the district that I represented. He stopped me. He said, "What'd you say?" I said, "We need to internalize the negative externalities." He said, I can't write this in this paper, man. We write at the 7th grade level. So I said, reveal the hidden cost. So the next day in the paper, it says, Inglis says we need to reveal the hidden cost. And that's essentially what it is. And if you remember Econ 101, it's basically the concept that we should put all the cost in on products and then have those products exposed to an accountable, transparent marketplace. And that in that way, then innovation happens and happens rapidly. So, for example, if I'm Inglis coal-fired electricity, I burn coal, I boil water, I make steam, I turn a turbine, and I send the electrons down the line to your house. It looks cheap until you consider the externalities, the costs that I'm imposing on society. So I scrub my stacks some, but some of the small particulates end up in my neighbor's lungs. Most of them cough it up and go along, but some of them end up at the hospital. When they get to the hospital, I'm not held accountable for those costs. It's a great deal for me. I get away with socializing my soot. It's really perfect for me. And also, I'm not held accountable for the climate damages that I'm causing. Great deal for me. Stinks for society, stinks for posterity, but it's a great deal for me. But at some point, we're going to realize that, wait a minute, Inglis, be even biblically accountable. Hold your ash on your property. You can't do on your property something that harms somebody else's property or person. So hold that on your property. Well, I'm heard to complain to the local member of Congress. Oh no, terrible idea, Congresswoman. Terrible idea, Congressman. If you put that accountability on me, I'm going to have to buy a bunch of equipment, additional scrubbers, and figure out some way to sequester my CO2. And I'm going to add that to the rate base, and I'm going to pass it on to your constituents. And they're going to be powerfully mad at you because their electricity rates have gone up. Well, what we do at Republican.org, we dream of the day that conservative members of Congress look back at me and say, Inglis, we're already paying the full cost of your supposedly cheap coal-fired electricity. We pay at the healthcare system. We pay in climate damages. So own up to all those expenses and go ahead and put them on the meter because we're ready to see them. And at that point is when the innovation happened. Because, then this thing that you see there on that slide about no subsidies, which there's somebody in the wind industry there that maybe saw that and had heart palpitations. They saw that no subsidy thing because they realized that wind can't exist without the production tax credit. Solar can't exist without the investment tax credit. But if you make me, Inglis coal-fired electricity, fully accountable and take away my implicit subsidy, wow, then they don't need those subsidies. You've leveled the playing field. You've internalized the negative externality. And now it's just a free enterprise competition on a level playing field to make it happen. So that's, as I say, the essence of what we're about at Republican.org. It's about internalizing negative externalities. It's about getting conservatives to really believe in the power of free enterprise. And I would venture this, since your Uncle Charlie is coming for Thanksgiving, let me prepare you a little bit. We think that the reason that Charlie has had so much trouble with climate change and the climate conversation is not only is it not been conducted in a different language, like I was saying earlier, it's not his language, it's the language of the left, not the language of the right. And so you can see some of those words in that earlier slide that can help turn that conversation to a different direction. And being energy optimist and climate realist is a different place for him too. But here's another thing that is causing Charlie to have this problem. We think it's something that's called solution aversion. I was sounding like an economist earlier. Now I'm going to start sounding like a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychiatrist either. But what we learn from psychiatry is this. The concept of solution aversion is that if I doubt that I have a solution that fits with my values, then I doubt the existence of the problem. It sounds utterly irrational, doesn't it? Except I tell you, we all do it. So to illustrate that, here's the plan of surgery for that back problem you're having. First, we're going to remove your head. After we've got your head off, we're going to work on your spine. Then we're going to put your head back on. Thanks, doc. I'm feeling a lot better. I don't have a back problem. If that's your solution, I don't have a problem. So what happened with conservatives and Charlie coming to your Thanksgiving table is that this is what he heard about climate. The UN, with their blue helmets on, are going to come to America and get with the US Environmental Protection Agency, and they are going to regulate your very breath. There's nothing in that paragraph attractive to a conservative. So what we live to do is to present this different concept of internalizing negative externalities, of accountability, of stewardship, and then help conservatives to see that that there's a different way to approach this. By the way, I'll drop just a footnote here. If you're a progressive and you're saying, Inglis is talking all this, he's got bright red on all of his slides, and he's talking real free, high octane free enterprise. But it sounded sort of familiar, this accountability concept, particularly as I'll get into here in a moment, this idea of pricing carbon dioxide. And if that starts to sound familiar, it might be because Al Gore has been for the same thing for about 30 years. Um, but that's why we have some hope we can bring America together and bring the country to lead the world to a solution. But um, if I could just add to that, is what is that specific solution? This is what we think is the most efficient way to internalize the negative externalities. We think it's a upstream application of a revenue neutral, border adjustable carbon tax. Now, let me just say that those last two words, those last two words are difficult, right? Carbon tax. But the first two compound adjectives, ladies and gentlemen, let's focus on those. Forget about those last two words about a carbon tax for a moment. But yes, it is a carbon tax. But then we can make it revenue neutral and we can make it border adjustable. So first, the revenue neutrality. The idea is to put on a carbon tax at the mine, at the pipeline. There are only about 2,000 companies in America that either mine coal or that put stuff in a pipeline. Very small job for the IRS. They could do it in a corner of the room that you're in. So we apply the tax. Let's say it's $25 a ton. The price of your gasoline goes up by 21 cents a gallon. The price of electricity for the average home in America goes up by $11 a month. Now, whenever you hear people talking averages, beware, right? Because the reality is some states are going to be higher in that average and other states are lower. Indiana is going to be higher because several years ago you were 97% coal, I believe it is. I think you're now driving down into the 80s. Meanwhile, the Pacific Northwest probably won't even notice the carbon tax on their electricity bills because they've got so much hydro resource. But that quantifies it for you. It's not catastrophic. It is a price signal, but it's not catastrophic. So it's revenue neutrality piece of this would be that we either rebate that money to the people in the form of a dividend, or we cut taxes somewhere else in equal amount. So for example, my bill, the Raise Wages, Cut Carbon Act of 2009, would have reduced payroll taxes, the FICA taxes that that we all pay when we're working. 6.2% is shown on your check, your paycheck. 6.2% your employer pays. It's not shown on your paycheck. It's a 12.4% tax. It's the most regressive tax we've got. In other words, regressivity means it harms poor people. And so the Congressional Budget Office says that if you do this carbon tax and reduce the FICA tax, the bottom 70% in America do better. Another way of dealing with that regressivity is, as I said, to dividend the money back. That gets to a solution toward regressivity as well. So key concept there, and one of the only two imperatives for us at republican.org is to be revenue neutral. And then the second one is that it's border adjustable. And what that means is that we would apply the tax on entry of goods into the United States from countries that don't have the same carbon tax. So China would object, the World Trade Organization, saying that's an impermissible tariff. We think they lose based on precedents in the chemical industry. And after they've lost, we think they join us. And so here's an example. A sheet of flat steel is being sent through the port of Charleston, South Carolina today, let's say. It's come from China. They stole our technology, they've manipulated things, and here it comes. It's coming through the port of Charleston. So we would apply the tax. They would object. We think they lose in the WTO based on precedents in the chemical industry that say that you can tax based on the content of the stuff coming in. So this is a content tax. This would be a carbon content tax. So 24 hours after they've lost, they'd have the same price on carbon dioxide. Because as you know, they have an amazing way of reaching consensus in China. So they would, the reason they'd fight steel is coming through the port of Charleston. We're applying the tax. The tax is ending up in Washington, D.C. If they had collected that tax in China, tax money would have been remitted to Beijing, and that sheet of flat steel would come through the port of Charleston with no adjustment. So 24 hours later, they've got the same price on carbon dioxide. And then the whole world is following, because you're doing business anywhere in the world, you're doing business with America and China. And the result is a worldwide internalization of the negative externality associated with the burning of fossil fuels. And then you got 7 billion people demanding innovation. And in the enlightenment of self-interest, they pursue their self-interest. They see the price signal and they move away from it. And they go looking for other technologies. So that's the power of the free enterprise system. That's how we think that this would work. But I should say, not everyone shares my faith in free enterprise. And I can understand that, because there's some in the room who would say, listen, this is a scientific problem. We need to set the 350 as a cap and then regulate down to that. That's a respectable view, and surely is worth presenting, but that's not our view. Our view is that the better way to do this is not to attempt to regulate, but rather to price in that negative externality and then watch the free enterprise system deliver that innovation. And if I could just give you an example, then I'm going to move on here to your questions and comments here soon, is if you might not share my faith in free enterprise, but let me encourage you to consider that faith, because it's like this. In the 1980s, McKinsey, the famous consulting firm, was asked by AT&T to tell them how many cell phones would be in service at the year Y2K. So McKinsey thought and thought, came up with the answer, 800,000. Well, the only problem for McKinsey was that there were 800,000 cell phones going into service every 3 days as Y2K rolled around. So McKinsey had missed it by some number of orders of magnitude. But in fairness to McKinsey, back then, what were cell phones? Well, my first cell phone in my first race was in a bag. Maybe there's some people in the room that remember what it was like to have a bag phone. They were literally in a bag. It had a cord on it. You picked it up out of the cradle. You talked on it for $1 a minute. It worked in 2 of the 3 counties. The battery wasn't any good, so you had to keep it plugged in the cigarette lighter. That was cell phones in 1992. So no wonder McKinsey missed it. Now you're sitting there with a cell phone in your pocket that has 28 times the computing capacity of what we landed on the moon with. And it's got a battery that lasts. It's got the ability with WhatsApp to call any friend anywhere in the world $dollars a minute. So that's the power of free enterprise. Now, make me point out, I'm a Republican, not a libertarian, and apologies to libertarians in the room, but all of that I just described started with government, because DARPA was the one that invented the internet and the PC, and then it's handed over to commercialization, and commercialization drove the price down and improved the service. So that's what we hope. That's the message that we think could bring conservatives into this conversation. And if you could give me that next slide, I want to just particularly congratulate and urge you to join us in thanking Senator Braun for some things he's been doing. Yes, appropriate to applaud him, because here's the thing. That next slide will show you a letter that we'd invite you to sign on with us, particularly if you're a conservative in the room, because again, if you're progressive, please do applaud Senator Braun and encourage him. If you're a conservative in the room, you are really essential to keeping him encouraged on this path that he's on. By forming the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus in the Senate, and by recruiting Senator Romney and Senator Graham and Senator Murkowski of Alaska to that effort, Senator Braun is doing amazing work. I met with him recently, and I'm telling you, he's an impressive fellow on this topic. Because of his business acumen, he's going to present it, I think, just right, pitch perfect, really, for a conservative audience. And if you're in the room and you're a progressive and you think, well, I'd present it differently. Yes, you would. But here's the reality. The left is going about as far as it can go, to quote a line from Oklahoma. And so the increment, the piece that we're missing is American conservatives. And I can't think of anybody better to bring American conservatives into that conversation than Senator Braun, because it's a little bit of a different presentation and it's unexpected. You know, you would expect somebody in California or New York to be talking about this, or coastal elites. But when a senator from Indiana says, hey, there's a way for free enterprise to fix this, and innovation is the key, it's really worth listening. And it's a head-turning situation where many people in the country will be, I think, inspired. Conservatives will be inspired by what Senator Braun is doing. So I'm going to, if on that next slide, you'll see you can sign on to the letter with us. It's a simple thing to do. And I don't want to trick anybody in the audience that's a progressive to signing on with us, but especially if you're a conservative there and you want to join us in thanking Senator Braun, this next slide will show you how to do it. It's just republicen.org/join. You go there and it's about 4 things to fill out. It takes about a minute. And so I'll leave that up on the screen so you can join us if you wish. And at the same time, thank Senator Braun for taking this action. So let me stop there and see what questions or comments you have. I'm interested in your comments as well as your questions so that I can learn from what's going on in Indiana. Did I lose you there? Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Oh.
This proves we were not pretending that
Was
Congressman
that,
Inglis was
did
with
it
us.
just go on the screen?
You are now on our screen. Thank you so much
Okay, great.
to our audio team for being.
They said, no, go back to the little one. We don't want to see him. Just kidding. It's like the politicians who, I know some friends in Congress who, one in particular, who used to have a picture of himself with a full head of hair, really attractive. But that was like 20 years ago. And I always was concerned for him that when he showed up at the Rotary Club, they'd say, no, we want the good looking one, not you.
All right. Well, thank you again, Congressman. And we're going to dive in and ask you questions. As expected, there's a lot of brilliant and diverse questions here. So we'll start. So with this question, which is, what about a carbon tax on other sectors like agriculture, building, materials, etc.?
What we talk about is this upstream application that would apply economy-wide and through the border adjustment worldwide. But just yesterday, I was in Idaho and got a tutorial from a couple of wheat farmers about just how complex it is when you're dealing with agriculture. So I'd say this: we need to figure out a way to keep them in business, the wheat farmers, because we all like to eat, and they were quite concerned about whether the carbon tax would basically cause their inputs, particularly fuel cost and equipment cost, to go up substantially. As you heard me say earlier, it's not catastrophic, right? $25 a ton, 21 cents a gallon, $11 a month on a house. Of course, you rise into the $40 area, you get into 40 cents a gallon. It's not catastrophic, but they were educating me that the margin on wheat is quite small. And so one idea is perhaps to remove the carbon tax on agricultural fuels, a little bit like the way that we do off-road diesel. If you put off-road diesel in your tractor, you don't pay the highway taxes because you're not driving, typically don't drive that vehicle on the roads. You don't use up the roads. But I will tell you that I think that it's an indication of how we start with a very simple concept of a internalization of negative externalities. We talk about a border adjustable and revenue neutral carbon tax. But we're going to need to make adjustments to that in order to make sure we're not tanking industries like agriculture. And that's to be developed, I think. I'm not answering very specifically because, frankly, I think that it requires a great deal more work. There's another possibility, which is, of course, paying agriculture, making it worth their while to sequester CO2 for us, prairie grasses and things like that. And that's another possibility that might lead to substantial carbon reductions.
Okay, thank you, Congressman. We have got a ton of questions, and we have about 8 minutes, so I'm going to ask the next one, and if you can keep that in mind so that we can maximize the number of questions, that would be wonderful. So the next question is a blunt one to you, Congressman. Your message seems too dense and abstract. How can you translate your message in a way that gets rank and file Republicans on board?
Well, it's true. It's a true bill. That's what you say when the indictment is to the grand jury is true. It is a pretty complicated message. And after 12 years in Congress, this is what I know. Smart is hard, dumb is easy. You can say really dumb things to people and get them all charged up and do really dumb stuff. Or you can try to lead people to smarter things. And I think it's just the burden we have to bear, is that if you're going to talk about smart policy, you just got to go and explain it, and then try to find ways to count on this, count on people somehow breaking through the solution aversion by hearing a solution that fits with their values, clearing the heart blockage, because once you get into the head, it'll clear pretty quickly. And the thing that's, I think, also true is we can appeal to the economics profession, which there's greater consensus among economists as to how to solve climate change than even there is among the scientists as to the cause of climate change. So the solution consensus is even greater than the cause consensus, which is pretty amazing. But yes, we do have to find ways to make it accessible, and that's a big challenge because it's a pretty complex thing to describe.
Congressman, the next question is, has Fox News ever invited you on to present your ideas or delve into conversation about climate change?
Say that last part, Tim?
Oh, sure. Has Fox News, A, invited you, and B, have they kind of allowed you an opportunity to talk about climate science or climate public policy?
See, I missed you. I lost you there for a second. What was it?
first of all, have you been on Fox News to talk about
Oh, yeah.
climate
Um,
issues?
As to Fox, yes, I've been on Fox. Neil Cavuto recently had me on, which is interesting. And of course, we spend more time on MSNBC. I wish we had more opportunities on Fox, because that's, of course, the opportunity. That's the audience we're after. And talk radio also goes pretty well, because people hear it so differently. What they expect to hear is a language of less, and we get on and we talk about more energy, more mobility, more freedom in a language of abundance, and they're really pretty surprised by it.
All right. Well, we have so many questions here. We have so many questions here, Congressman, and I'm just trying to sort through these, so bear with me. All right. Okay, it's interesting. A few different audience members asked basically the same question, which is how do you price in externalities without regulation?
Without
Regulation.
without regulation. Yes, through a price signal. And that's this is, of course, the bedrock conservatism that we love to show to conservative audiences. There's what I like to show especially is a clip that you can see on our website under the media tab. It's of Milton Friedman, Ronald Reagan's economics advisor, the father of the Chicago School of Economics, and somebody that every conservative knows you're supposed to bow at the mention of his name. Dr. Friedman was on the Phil Donahue show frequently, and in this clip that you'll see on our website, Phil asked him, what do you do about pollution then, Dr. Friedman, if you don't want to regulate it? And Friedman says, you tax it. You tax pollution. And then he goes on to explain what I tried to channel him earlier. He goes on to explain internalizing negative externalities. And so, again, the last question, it is a hard message, but if you get with conservatives, and if you show them that clip of Milton Friedman, they're reminded of where they've come from. And they're reminded of these bedrock principles that they really believe in. And then they start looking for a way to enter the conversation.
Thank you. The next question, the context, well, one thing I'll say, Congressman, is that we have a good contingent of people in our audience who are members of Citizens Climate Lobby. So there's certainly a inbuilt sympathy among at least a portion of our attendees here to the notion of a carbon tax and to this free enterprise approach to driving down carbon emissions.
I'm missing you there, Jesse.
I'm sorry?
Now you're back.
Okay. The question is, how does free enterprise solutions address issues like coal ash ponds and contaminated soils?
Not directly, of course, only indirectly. And basically, it's like this. A price on carbon dioxide make it so that coal would come to a pretty quick end as a source of burning and making power. It would be replaced even more rapidly than it has been replaced so far by natural gas. So you wouldn't have those coal ash ponds because you wouldn't have any coal being burned. But it is an indirect approach. And there you see perfectly the contrast between a regulatory approach and a price signal. The regulatory approach would be to step in with regulations and say, you got to do this and that to those ponds. And we're already doing some of that, but you can do it more aggressively. That's a regulatory approach. The price signal approach is to just say, okay, all those costs associated with the burning of fossil fuels are now being internalized to coal. Now, power companies, make your own decisions. Does it make sense to continue to add to those coal ash ponds, or does it make sense to switch your power source? And I think most utilities would do what's happening in Indiana right now, is moving away from coal and very rapidly. If you put on a carbon tax, they run from coal and not fast walk. They run from it.
All right, thank you. One last question, and then we will get ready for our next panel. And we wish we could have more time with you, Congressman. And that is kind of, again, boiling down a few different questions that we received from the audience. What will it take to get Donald Trump to take on climate change?
Say it again.
What do you think it will take? Well, I want to leave you with a softball question,
Yeah.
Congressman, which is, what will it take to get Donald Trump to address climate change? What conditions are necessary for that to happen?
Well, perhaps this, just a recognition that when the facts overtake your ideology, it's better to be overtaken. And I think most people eventually come to that conclusion. You know, it gets a little bit silly to continue to say things when the facts have just literally overtaken you. But hopefully he'll be affected. President Trump and Vice President Pence from your state will be affected by Kevin McCarthy, for example. And if I could just leave you with this note, it's, you know, in a way, I'm the worst commercial for this on the right, as you see, because I stepped off that wall over there and then got whacked by a primary opponent. So you could think, well, everybody in Washington says, don't let your shadow fall on me, Bob Inglis, because, you know, I don't want to suffer your fate. But it's so different now. The circumstances have changed dramatically. The economy is better than it was when I got tossed out in the dark days of the Great Recession. We've all had more experiences with climate change. And there are more groups like ours messaging on the eco-right as a balance to the environmental left. But then the fourth, and maybe most relevant to answering your question, is there's a political reality, which is that Republicans lost control of the House in Washington in November of 2018. And by February 6th, the House Energy and Commerce Committee Republicans issued a press release saying, headline, Republicans are focused on realistic solutions to climate change. And what has dawned on Republicans is you can't win that majority back if you can't win suburban districts. And you can't win suburban districts with a retro position on climate change. And so the update to this is October 25th, Kevin McCarthy in the Washington Examiner, a conservative newspaper in Washington, Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader in the House of Representatives, the guy who would like to be Speaker, who's minority leader, said that the GOP has to change on climate change. And so, again, those three substantive reasons, and then there's a big political reason for why it is that these times are so different than when I got tossed out. So I'd leave you with that hopeful note that it's not as though we're still in that decade of disastrous disputation that literally started in 2008 and ended in 2018. So it's literally a decade. We're no longer in that decade of disastrous disputation. We've got the problem from it, which is anytime you delay, it gets much more expensive and much harder to fix. But that decade seems to have ended. And so we can celebrate that. And the thing that I'd ask, especially from progressives in the room, is that you extend grace to people like me. You know, I'm one of these people that was opposed to climate action and then switched. And that requires a lot of grace from progressives who knew all along that we had a problem with climate change. So please extend grace to Charlie at Thanksgiving dinner and say, Charlie, what would it take to get you in on this? Don't grind him in and make him say that, yeah, I was really a dum-dum. Build him up. Help him to see the power of his own ideas, of free enterprise innovation. And then see if you can join him in believing in the power of that free enterprise innovation. And that, I think, will cause us to bring America together and lead the world to a solution on climate change.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Hopefully you're feeling the love over around here. Okay. Thank you so much, Congressman.